This is the national programme of the BBC. There is no news tonight, so until 9 o'clock, here is some music on record.
It's almost inconceivable that there was a time in which no news was reported. However, the 1930s, the decade where much was hoped for but little was achieved, is synonymous with the inaction that the BBC sought to give correspondence on. Both Charlie Chaplin's modernist film, Modern Times, and Patrick Hamilton's late modernist novel, Hangover are set in this decade, trying to make sense of the inaction that they see in their fellow men. At face value, these texts are often considered tales about domestic love affairs. Yet, when the texts are analysed more closely, a hidden meaning emerges. Both Chaplin and Hamilton use their works to rally the working class against their oppressors by means of a Marxist-Leninist revolution. Chaplin was born into poverty in Britain and reflects on his own childhood when he writes his silent film. His portrayal of criminals merely as hungry, accompanied by the enlarged nature of the food that dominates the foreground in this shot, demonstrates how Chaplin reflects popular thought in his time that the dehumanization of labour had widened the gap between the rich and the poor. So it must have been devastating for Chaplin, a Marxist, to watch his fellow men accept their fortuitous fate. Indeed, throughout the film, the workers are shown to be indoctrinated. The herd of sheep at the start of the movie is juxtaposed with the herd of humans, conflating the passive workers with animals led to the slaughter. Here, Chaplin identifies that the issue with dehumanization of labour is that the proletariat are unable to see their own oppression, given their conditioning to the system. As Roland Barthes explains, to see someone who does not see is the best way to be intensely aware of what he does not see. In this manner, Chaplin, a left-wing sympathiser, challenges the stasis that he sees in the workers of his time by elucidating their own ignorance to us, his audience. Later in the film, we see the crisis of passivity appear in its most blatant form. Blindfolded, Chaplin uses a symbol of sight, or lack thereof, to convey the ignorance and passivity of the working class to their predicament. His sudden regaining of sight leads to his fear for death. Whilst this could be seen as a plea for creativity, Chaplin actually uses this metaphor to convey the stark reality of the plight of the workers. If only they could see what lay in front of them, they would try desperately to get as far away from the cliff as possible. Analyst Gregory Steffens put it nicely. Chaplin is concerned with an economic counter-revolution, the draconian imposition of a Taylorite regime. The face of what he rejects is devotion to profit, so extreme that even a trip to the bathroom is monitored. It seems that Chaplin wants his people to revolt, whilst they still can, to fight against the crisis of poverty and passivity in the 1930s. This call to revolution is synonymous with Marxist theory of the inevitable proletariat revolution, where society will escape a perpetual state of conflict for resources in a capitalist superstructure. In fact, Chaplin considers revolution so tantalizingly close that he utilizes comedy to demonstrate how the people are blind to the obvious. Chaplin outlines clearly the benefits of such a revolution against passivity. Whilst as a worker in the factory, Chaplin's work is so unfulfilling that his active intellect, as described by Aristotelian philosophy, becomes passive, demonstrated by his comedic need to twist in whichever bolts he can find in the factory, hyperbolically conveying the dehumanization of work in a forward society. When Chaplin demonstrates the liberation that comes from creativity in the dockyard scene, comedically, through highlighting the dangers of mundane work, he makes a contrast with the tramp's previous job, emphasizing how an active intellect can benefit the worker. This all culminates at the end of the film when the tramp is conversing with the gamin through the use of the following intertitle. Through utilizing hopeful music and a counter-passive dialogue, Chaplin ultimately conveys the need for society to undergo a proletariat revolution. In this manner, Chaplin challenges the passivism created by Fordism, urging his society to transcend conflict through a revolution. At the end of the decade, a new literary challenger emerges, Patrick Hamilton and his reflective novel, Hangover. Set in pre-war Britain, although at its core a love story, the novel really acts as a mouthpiece for Hamilton to stress his concerns about Britain's avoidance of inevitable conflict, both in terms of countering fascism and adopting Marxism. Hamilton identifies a chrysalis, fascism, which, according to Anthony Quinn, had been incubating in English life and had now burst forth into the hideous black butterfly. Hamilton suggests that a passive and complacent British public has allowed evil to grasp a foothold on the homeland, yet are unwilling to overcome this growing crisis. Hangover Square, itself metonymic for the pub crawl that pervaded British society in Hamilton's time, reveals Bone's ability to drink the day away and squander any ability to counter the rising crisis of fascism. It reminds me of an old quote by Einstein: "The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result." It must have driven Hamilton, a troubled and conflicted alcoholic himself, insane to see the mad British drink and drink again, hoping that their appeasement and tolerance of fascism would one day cause it to disappear, like one might do with a wound, not noticing it slowly become infected and deadly. This concept also has philosophical grounding. Sartre's idea of bad faith states that human beings, under pressure from social forces, adopt false values and disown their innate freedom, acting inauthentically. With this in context, Hamilton suggests through Hangover Square that furthering Marxism was squandered in the 1930s, a decade where mankind could have swept the detritus of the deracinated urban society away. But instead, much like Bone, prefer to sit drinking in saloon bars like their friends do, acting in bad faith and numbing their sensibilities with alcohol. The convenience of acting in bad faith, along with the prevalence of alcoholism, suggests that there is no room for honesty in Earl's Court. So when Bone explains she had no idea of preventing a recurrence of such a feeling by making an attempt not to get so drunk again, his hyperbolic language, which reinforces late modernist themes of fatalism, demonstrates how both the passive fascists and the passive Britons squandered any chance for social development, instead intent on being complacent in the numbing pub crawl of Earl's Court. So at the end of our revision, there's one key takeaway. Both Chaplin and Hamilton use narratives to reflect on their contextual concerns, urging their fellow men to rise up against fascism or Fordism and overcome their passivity and inaction. In the decade with no news, this would be a warning lost on many. As modern citizens, we can take this warning from the past and use it to help instill action in our fellow men. And then maybe we might honor the legacy of these great artists by rejecting passivity and embracing activity.